If you thought navigating the terrifying, monster-filled landscape of the Upside Down was the biggest challenge the characters faced, you need to think again.
Oh, absolutely.
Because the sources we have gathered suggest the real threat in the latest episodes is the utter breakdown of the reality they've come to know.
And is driven by some really questionable writing choices and a massive, unbelievable plot hole that takes the form of a giant fleshy wall.
That assessment just perfectly captures the sheer cognitive dissonance emerging from the audience feedback. We've synthesized a huge stack of listener source material covering these newest installments, and the commentary is just relentless.
Yeah, it's everywhere. And it's focusing specifically on the most confusing dimensional lore, the moments of character incompetence that infuriated the fandom, and, the massive controversial decisions that are supposed to be setting the stage for the ultimate finale.
So our mission in this deep dive is crucial. We are clarifying this chaotic influx of information and audience criticism.
We have to.
We have to translate the heavy science fiction jargon, dive deep into the specific logic holes everyone is pointing out, and give you a clear, informed view of what truly matters as we hurtle toward the conclusion of this epic story.
Well, the audience is demanding airtight answers after this latest volume. And judging by the sheer volume of detailed frustration in the sources, we have a lot of structural repairs to discuss.
Indeed. We're seeing criticisms spanning everything from the military's baffling lack of competence to these intense philosophical debates about whether character motivations justify suspending basic survival instincts.
And all of this is overlaid with a massive and frankly confusing dump of new mythology surrounding the nature of reality itself. It's overwhelming.
And the core complaint, it's echoed across the sources, it's simple. If the fundamental writing isn't meticulous now, the ending will undoubtedly suffer dramatically.
Exactly.
Okay, let's unpack this new shifting reality first, because for 4 seasons, we thought we knew exactly what the Upside Down was.
We really did.
But the newest lore fundamentally changes the geography of this cosmic horror dimension.
For the longest time, the foundational mythology of the show rested on the concept of the Upside Down being a parallel dimension.
A photographic negative, right? A mirror of Hawkins.
Exactly. Seemingly frozen in time on the day Will Byers first disappeared. This was the fixed rule.
But the soon is revealed that Dr. Brenner's, or Dr. Breiner's, as many sources reference him, his research, which was suddenly just made available to the kids, has completely redefined the landscape.
It's totally changed. The Upside Down is not, in fact, a dimension unto itself.
And this is a crucial distinction we have to grasp, because it recontextualizes the entire scope of the threat.
Precisely. The deep dive analysis confirms the Upside Down is not a full dimension, but rather a cylindrical wormhole.
A wormhole.
Think of it less like a parallel world you step into, like Narnia or Wonderland, and more like a long, unstable, flexible tube. It's a temporal highway connecting 2 very distant physical locations. A pathway.
So, if we look at it as a road system, the Upside Down is the road itself, unstable and horrifying as it is.
It is.
But where does this road lead? What's the destination?
Well, the road leads between our world, the right side up, and a newly introduced, far more terrifying concept that Brenner's research called Dimension X.
Dimension X.
Which Dustin, in a moment of apt naming, later renames The Abyss.
The Abyss. Okay, that sounds much worse than Demogorgons. What exactly is Dimension X, or the Abyss, according to the sources?
It is described as a vast void of nothingness, the ultimate 0 point.
Wow.
The sources refer to it as this utterly terrifying entropy-driven space that nearly consumed key characters. Hopper, Eleven, Key, and famously, Steve's BMW when they got too close to a weakened point in the boundary.
It's literal emptiness.
Yes, and this change is massive because it elevates the stakes. Vecna isn't trying to conquer a mirror world. He's trying to use the Upside Down as a literal bridge to merge the abyss nothingness with our vibrant, living reality.
That dramatically shifts the stakes from merely a hostile takeover to an attempted dimensional annihilation.
Completely.
It's not about monsters taking over our turf. It's about absolute nothingness being used as the final destination. This elevates the lore into cosmic horror territory, forcing us to consider existence itself as the thing under attack.
And this change ties directly into the next piece of new and frankly highly controversial lore revealed during Dancy and Jonathan's foray into the Upside Down version of Hawkins' lab.
Right. And here's where the high-level science and the frustrating plot decisions really intersect.
They really do.
Nancy and Jonathan locate this swirling energy sphere anomaly hovering mysteriously on the roof of the lab.
And Brenner's newly revealed research identifies this object as being composed of exotic matter.
We need to pause here because this is where the writing drew intense fire.
It sure did.
Before we get into the shotgun critique, we need to understand what exotic matter is, even in the sci-fi context.
Well, generally speaking, exotic matter is a theoretical concept. It's material with negative mass or negative pressure. In fictional physics, you need exotic matter to do things like stabilize a wormhole or warp space-time.
So it's the glue.
It's the structural keystone, the necessary ingredient that allows the cylindrical wormhole to exist and remain open.
So this sphere is the dimensional linchpin. It is essential for maintaining the entire bridge between worlds.
Exactly. But the moment drew immediate fire from the audience, who, naturally, reached for immediate pop culture comparisons. Many sources pointed out the shield generator critique.
Right, likening this object to the device protecting the Death Star in Return of the Jedi. It was clearly positioned as the single core target you must destroy to stop the big bad.
So it's too perfect of a target.
And the narrative decision that follows is, well, it's Nancy, demonstrating her traditional action hero role. She shoots the sphere with her shotgun.
And it explodes.
Yeah, it explodes, sending massive shockwaves that ripple through the Upside Down and hit that massive fleshy structure nearby, the infamous meat wall.
But this is where the audience logic completely breaks down. If this exotic matter sphere is so fundamental that it is required to stabilize a cylindrical wormhole connecting two realities,
how can it be destroyed?
Or even damaged by a single relatively standard shotgun blast? One source called it the physics equivalent of fixing a black hole with a sledgehammer.
That feels like the physics equivalent of solving world hunger with a really powerful stapler, as one of our sources suggested.
That's a good one.
The stakes, which were just elevated by the introduction of the Abyss, are immediately undermined if the source of interdimensional chaos and space-time manipulation is so easily shattered.
It leads to a profound perception that the writers are introducing complex scientific concepts, cylindrical wormholes, exotic matter, purely for texture.
Right, for flavor.
Only to treat them with highly convenient, simplistic, almost arbitrary Dungeons and Dragons rules when the plot demands urgency. The established physics rules are changed, but then they are immediately and casually broken the next moment by our heroes.
And that is deeply frustrating for a technical audience. Deeply.
Speaking of things that violate logic and continuity, let's dive into the massive physical structure everyone suddenly notices. The massive meat wall controversy.
This is perhaps one of the most structurally problematic elements, according to a massive segment of the audience. The discovery is this gigantic, fleshy, hive-like structure.
Described as a massive meat wall, Vecna's lair, or maybe the physical manifestation of his heart.
And it's discovered right near the portal at the military base.
The military portal, let us remind everyone that Hopper, Joyce, and several other characters have been using for quite some time now, entering the Upside Down for various reasons.
I mean, for years, really.
So the sources point out the major plot hole here, and it's difficult to argue against it. Characters like Hopper, Eleven, Will, Dustin, Nancy, Steve, Robin, Joyce.
Basically the entire main cast.
They've spent extensive time in the Upside Down on crawls, sometimes right near the known portals. How, in the entire history of interacting with this dimension, did nobody notice this enormous fleshy wall nearby?
It's not a small thing. Not at all. Many sources explicitly state that this strains credulity, asking if the heroes suddenly developed blindness.
We must acknowledge the only rational counterargument that the show seems to rely on,
which is
that Vecna only created the wall recently, now that he is significantly stronger and actively preparing the merger. It's a fast-growing, bioengineered fortress.
That is the narrative, Olive Branch. But critics immediately reject it.
Oh yeah, they're not buying it.
They retort that if the military base portal has been in use for years, and this wall is described as being pretty damn close to the primary entry point.
The big red butthole portal, as one source colorfully described it.
Right. Someone, especially a diligent, surveilling character like Hopper, should have seen the beginnings of this structure long ago. If it's Vecna's headquarters, it feels like a massive piece of set dressing that only appeared because the plot finally required Vecna to have a physical headquarters to attack in the finale.
It is the textbook definition of a retcon retroactive continuity.
Completely. The current narrative requires the sudden inclusion of something physical and massive that fundamentally contradicts the established visual history of the setting.
If the wall is a vital part of Vecna's plan to merge worlds, its sudden unexplained appearance just undercuts the long-term history of the Upside Down as we've experienced it with our core group.
And to tie back the lore, we have to quickly circle back to the final piece of the mythology puzzle that connects the dimensional science directly to Henry Creel's origins.
The role of the briefcase.
Exactly. The sources confirm the link back to Henry's traumatic past within the MKUltra project. Henry Creel encountered a spy, likely connected to Dr. Brenner's shady operations, whom he beat to death with a rock after the spy shot him in the hand.
And that spy was carrying a briefcase.
This is the literal nexus point.
The prevailing speculation, which the sources support as definitive breakdown, is that the briefcase contains stolen mind flayer particles. When Henry, in his moment of post-traumatic curiosity, opened that case, those particles likely entered him and are what physically transported him to the Abyss to Dimension X for those crucial 12 hours.
So the briefcase was far more than a simple narrative device in a flashback. It was the delivery mechanism for the Mind Flayer's influence.
It was the means by which Henry's human trauma was weaponized and transformed into the cosmic horror we know as Vecna. It is the definitive bridge between his human origin story and his supernatural identity.
It connects everything. The government conspiracy surrounding MKUltra, the source of the ultimate evil, the Mind Flayer, and the ultimate nature of the Upside Down as an unstable wormhole.
But even with these monumental lore revelations, the audience in the deep dive sources consistently expressed an inability to overlook the sheer stupidity of some of the character choices immediately afterward.
The logical consistency of the world crumbled, and then the character's survival instincts seemed to follow suit.
That's a perfect way to put it.
That's a perfect transition. The fundamental weakness in the show's physics logic seems to have seeped into the character decisions themselves. If the science is loose, perhaps the characters feel they can be too.
It certainly seems that way.
Let's turn now to the list of choices that generated what fans are calling the "everyone is stupid" critique.
It is genuinely baffling. I mean, when the world is demonstrably ending, the most logical course of action is typically survival and coordination.
You would think.
But what did two of our most seasoned monster fighters choose to do?
They chose C, have a full-blown, yelling, physical brawl with your best friend right in the monster's lair.
As detailed in the scene we're calling the fight in the heart of danger between Dustin and Steve.
The location makes it indefensible from a tactical standpoint.
Totally. The scene occurs inside the Hawkins lab in the volatile Upside Down, an environment brimming with sentient flowerhead monsters, tentacle things, and just this constant palpable danger.
And the characters are not only yelling loudly, but having a full-on physical brawl, tackling each other right there, creating a massive amount of noise and movement.
It's insane.
The sources found the timing utterly stupid and a complete lapse in basic survival instincts. But what drove this sudden, life-threatening conflict?
Well, Dustin is still deep in mourning and guilt-stricken over Eddie's death, viewing it as a personal failure.
Right. And Steve is struggling with his own feelings about Dustin isolating himself, and he makes a pretty low blow, but poking fun at Eddie's heroic sacrifice. He kind of diminishes its value.
The emotional core grief, misplaced anger, relational stress is understandable, but the logistical choice to address it via a screaming fistfight in a death trap was deemed indefensible.
And this led to the question, why is Dustin, who has known Steve for 4 or 5 years and been through countless interdimensional crises with him, siding so intensely with the memory of Eddie, whom he knew for maybe a year, to the point of throwing haymakers in this location?
That's a fair challenge to the audience critique. But isn't it also possible that the writers needed that fight to prove that Steve and Dustin's bond was strong enough to withstand that intense pressure?
So you're saying fans might be too focused on the logistics, the fact that they should have been stealthy, and ignoring the emotional payoff that this cathartic confrontation delivered.
That raises a critical distinction. The sources agree that despite the harshness, the fight did lead to a powerful reconciliation. It showcased their deep, established bond.
Okay.
The problem isn't the emotional destination. It's the illogical vehicle they took to get there. It reads less like genuine character conflict erupting organically and more like a forced emotional confrontation designed to deliver a cathartic moment at the expense of established character competence.
Experienced characters should know better than to yell in the Upside Down.
They absolutely should.
It's prioritizing emotional payoff over tactical realism, a thematic thread that runs dangerously thin throughout this volume. And we see this tension between emotion and logic again in the highly awkward, world-ending romantic romantic tension between Nancy and Jonathan.
Yes, the Nancy-Jonathan love triangle and the unproposal.
The sources confirm that the drama is still running hot. Jonathan has completely lacked confidence, and Nancy is fully embracing what the sources term her girl boss arc, making her feel distant and focused on the mission.
But the writers chose to address this deep, long-simmering romantic tension while the characters were literally trapped in the Upside Down.
Specifically, they're stuck in a room that is rapidly flooding with a strange caustic liquid that is beginning to re-solidify.
It's essentially trapping them in place.
Yeah.
And that, of course, is the perfect moment for Jonathan to choose to confess his awkward truths and deliver what the sources called his unproposal.
An unproposed.
Yes. The scene is rich with intended metaphor, though its timing is baffling. Jonathan reveals he secretly stashed Nancy's engagement ring inside a cassette tape, specifically the Love Supreme cassette that Murray gave him.
Oh, that detail is interesting.
The source material highlights this symbolism. The jazz masterpiece progresses from sorrow to euphoria, perfectly mirroring their relationship arc. Jonathan realizes that their supreme love can't transcend their current physically divided and directionless reality, so he symbolically unproposes, acknowledging the fracture.
And what immediately follows, of course, is the massive moment of plot armor. The liquid solidifies just as they finish their heartfelt, awkward confessions, saving them from being flooded, melted, or trapped.
The timing is undeniably suspect, and it drew immediate audience criticism that the Upside Down was magically affected by the power of friendship confession.
Right. The environment, which should be universally hostile, inexplicably pauses and stabilizes just long enough for the romantic tension to resolve.
It just reinforces the complaint that major characters have such robust plot armor that the very physics of the environment bends to accommodate their emotional needs.
It was an awkward moment that many felt should have been resolved between seasons, not while the literal world was flooding and requiring immediate tactical action.
Exactly. And that sentiment about plot armor is compounded when you look at the military side of the plot. We need to talk about the absolute collapse of basic competency shown by the military forces protecting the gateway.
Let's dive into military incompetence and plot armor at the base.
The critique here is justifiably relentless. We are dealing with a U.S. military base operating in the Upside Down, running top-secret, high-stakes experiments.
And housing one of the surviving MK-Ultra children key, Patient 9, who is deemed vital for national security.
Yet, it's guarded by next to no one. Hopper and 11 are able to infiltrate and later escape with Key far too easily, defying all expectations for a high-security black site.
And the incompetence gets detailed and almost comical, undermining the threat of a well-funded advanced military. The military contingent, led by a character referred to as Sarah Connor in the sources.
A nod to Linda Hamilton and the Terminator franchise, indicating a tough female leader.
Right. And she needs to access a room holding Key. They choose to cut through a door. A painstaking, loud process that takes 10 times longer when a perfectly operational card reader is visible right next to it.
It's a classic example of contriving delay for dramatic tension, but it sacrifices all sense of military professionalism and intelligence.
It makes them look like idiots.
It does, and the great escape that follows is equally scrutinized. 11, Hopper, and Key acquire a Humvee and flee the base without being tracked or spotted, despite the base conducting advanced surveillance and running advanced weapons programs.
The viewer is left asking, how did 3 people manage to steal an armored vehicle and drive away from a top-secret facility without a single alarm being sounded or a chopper being deployed?
It gives the hero's victory a sense of unearned ease. If the antagonists are so uniformly incompetent, the hero's actions feel less heroic.
But the single most egregious example of plot armor, the moment that critics argue destroyed all stakes for secondary characters, belongs impossibly to Karen Wheeler.
The sources highlight this sequence as an absolute high point of cringe moments. Let's recap the physical impossibility of her survival and subsequent action.
Okay, so in a previous episode, Max's mother, Karen Wheeler, suffered severe near-fatal injuries, stabbed viciously in the gut and slashed across the neck, presumably by a Demogorgon or a Demodog.
By all realistic accounts, even by the elevated standards of genre fiction, she should be dead, or at minimum, in critical care and immobile.
Absolutely.
Instead, she miraculously recovers enough in episode 6 to perform a heroic feat. She not only leaves the hospital bed, but manages to carry an oxygen tank. Locates Lucas and Robin in the exact basement laundry room where they are cornered by multiple monsters, and then successfully blows up the Demodogs using the tank.
and survives the explosion herself while barely injured.
Right. This sequence drew massive critical attention. It's cited as irrefutable evidence that the show is unwilling to kill off anyone remotely connected to the main cast. The injuries she sustained should have been instantly debilitating.
Her recovery and subsequent action are just an impossible feat of survival that functionally removes all genuine risk and consequence from the narrative.
The pervasive complaint is that the show continuously baits character deaths, like Hopper being captured, Max being targeted, or Karen being brutalized, yet it never pulls the trigger on anyone important.
Which leads to what audiences label fake tension.
Exactly. The only major deaths tend to be the beloved single-season side characters like Bob or Eddie. The unwillingness to trim the cast has a direct impact on the next major critique: the pacing.
That's right. If you have too many characters who must survive, you have to find reasons for them to talk, pause, or execute side missions, which led many fans to feel that crucial moments were pure filler, disrupting the inevitable high-stakes confrontation.
The sources are heavily divided on the emotional arcs presented in Volume 2. Some hail them as necessary character development, long overdue, while others slam them as atrocious momentum killers that felt entirely forced into an already packed timeline.
And we have to start with the one that generated the most social commentary, Will Byers' coming out scene.
Oh, absolutely.
This scene involves Will coming out and fully explaining his sexuality, including his hidden, unrequited feelings for Mike with intense emotional vulnerability.
And the critical response from many viewers was immediate and harsh. It was labeled an atrocious momentum killer that felt overly drawn out and unrealistic.
Because, as the sources frequently pointed out, everyone, except Mike, already knew or suspected Will was gay.
Right. The frustration stemmed from the perceived wasted screen time. Why dedicate so much crucial late-season momentum, literally right before the final operation, to a revelation that was already common knowledge?
It felt like manufactured drama designed to fill time.
However, the deep dive analysis provides the crucial, often overlooked story justification. And this is vital for understanding the writer's intent.
Which is that Will's confession was timed precisely just before the final operation as a tactical move.
That's the key insight. Vecna's power relies entirely on exploiting hidden trauma and deeply seated shame via the hive mind.
So if Will was secretly struggling with his feelings and the shame associated with keeping them hidden, Vecna could use that personal vulnerability as a psychological weapon.
Compromising Will and the entire group's strategy. By bringing the secret into the light, Will neutralize that potential weakness.
So it ceases to be a scene merely for emotional catharsis and becomes a critical piece of tactical preparation.
It is a form of preemptive psychological defense, safeguarding himself and the mission from the villain's most potent psychological warfare.
That makes a huge difference in the justification, even if the execution felt awkwardly paced and obvious to many viewers.
It definitely elevates the scene from being gratuitous filler to being a necessary piece of the strategic playbook against Vecna. It is important to note, too, that the writers stated this scene took the longest to write out of anything they had ever done for the show.
Wow.
Which highlights the complexity and immense weight they placed on getting that specific character and tactical moment correct, regardless of the audience's perceived pacing issue.
Okay, transitioning to another highly criticized emotional sequence that suffered severely from pacing issues, the Holly Max Mindscape sequence.
This sequence occurs inside Vecna's memory mindscape, sometimes referred to by the characters as Camzots. Max is trying to guide Holly to find an exit.
And this exit involves following a clue that leads them through the Captain Midnight telescope cover, which forms an M-shaped clue toward the tunnel where Henry's traumatic memory of killing the spy occurred.
The narrative purpose is clear. Explore Henry's past to find a weakness that Eleven can exploit. But the execution failed to deliver urgency.
Right. The core pacing critique centers on the fact that Max and Holly stand and talk for a long, extended period right in front of the brightly lit open escape portal.
Audience members reported genuine frustration, claiming they were screaming at the TV for the characters to simply run through the exit.
And Max is particularly criticized for being distracted, seemingly prioritizing her own motivation, getting back to Lucas over the immediate need to escape.
She takes time to deliver a lengthy motivational speech, telling Holly she needs to find her inner strength to escape the monster in the real world.
Why the delay? Was this a genuine lapse in Max's survival urgency, or was it the writers deliberately slowing the narrative to inject more of that emotional explanation?
The argument overwhelmingly supports the latter. It felt like a deliberate slowing of momentum, injecting cheesy talks and exposition where immediate life or death action was clearly required.
And while the scene was essential for revealing Henry's trauma, specifically his memory of beating the spy to death with a rock and opening the briefcase, the emotional monologue undercut the necessary survival narrative.
It allowed Vecna to successfully telekinetically grab Hawley back up into his fleshy hive.
This brings us to a pervasive and quite damaging critique about the show's communication style overall.
The dumbing down dialogue critique.
Yes. This is a significant audience frustration across the board, asserting that the dialogue, particularly the scientific and strategic planning, felt consistently forced, cheesy, and dumbed down.
The core complaint is that the writing relies heavily on what one source called explanation, not exploration.
Instead of showing competence or letting the audience connect the dots, characters explicitly explain every single concept, every single plan, often multiple times.
And this dialogue style is tied to a rather explosive, albeit unconfirmed, rumor cited in the sources. The belief that Netflix allegedly instructed the writers to simplify the show's language so that people scrolling TikTok should be able to understand what's happening.
If that's true, it would certainly explain the perceived loss of character competence that many viewers lament.
Oh, absolutely. We see odd moments that directly defy previous characterizations. Dustin, a high school kid, suddenly understands complex theories of cylindrical wormholes, exotic matter, and high-level dimension physics just from reading a few papers provided by Brenner.
This rapid, almost instantaneous acquisition of deep, highly specialized knowledge feels contrived when the plot demands scientific exposition. Contrast this with early seasons, where Dustin's brilliance was shown through application and puzzle solving, not just rapid-fire definitions.
It's the difference between dialogue that serves character depth and dialogue that serves plot exposition. When the dialogue becomes purely explanatory, simply summarizing the plot point, it reduces the complexity of the characters.
It makes them feel less like the smart people they're supposed to be.
Exactly. And this perceived trend, combined with the extreme pacing issues and focus on emotional side quests, has many viewers fearing the absolute worst for the series' conclusion.
They echo anxieties over other major franchise endings, fearing that too much story is left, leading to a rushed, unsatisfying finale. And much of that fear is centered on the true nature of the final threat.
We've had Vecna as the primary mover for 2 seasons, but is he really the ultimate big bad, or is he just a lieutenant with a fancy name?
Let's connect the dots on the villain hierarchy.
The show has invested so much character weight and terrifying presence in Henry Creel Vecna as the primary antagonist, and yet the audience consensus based on the deep dive sources is firm. Vecna is not the final boss.
So if the stakes are truly the dimensional destruction of reality, then who is really sitting at the top of the evil food chain?
The consensus theory is that Vecna, or Henry Creel, is a general controlled by the Mind Flayer, or perhaps even a manifestation of the Mind Flayer's consciousness, rather than the true ultimate villain.
And this theory is heavily supported by the narrative evidence provided in the sources, right?
Very heavily.
What's the concrete evidence supporting the Mind Flayer's supremacy and Henry's subordination?
First, there is the visual cue. Vecna's lair, his physical headquarters, despite being made of flesh and viscera, fundamentally resembles a giant spider.
Which connects directly to the Mind Flayer's classic 8-legged motif. The Spider Queen in D&D lore, the entity that controls the hive mind.
Exactly. And second, and most importantly, is the origin story. The flashbacks clearly show Henry being exposed to stolen Mind Flayer particles after opening the spy's briefcase.
So this is the moment of genesis. It implies his transformation and immense power were derived from the entity, not inherent to him alone.
And crucially, Henry himself states in a moment of chilling fatalism that the black thing will win, referencing the massive swirling shadow entity, the Mind Flayer, as the superior power structure.
He sees himself as a tool, or at best, an advanced agent.
Yes, and if the Mind Flayer is still the true puppet master pulling the strings, that has severe negative implications for the pacing of the finale, which is where all that audience anxiety comes from.
Absolutely. If the remaining runtime must accommodate defeating Vecna, then revealing and explaining the original Mind Flayer and then combating that entity.
There's just not enough time. The show has an immense amount of story left to cover in a very short amount of time.
And this is precisely why audience members are expressing fears of a Game of Thrones finale type of deal. A rushed, unsatisfying ending that sacrifices complex explanation and earned resolution for speed.
The concern is highly quantified. If they have 2 hours left, with rumors of 30 to 40 minutes dedicated just to an epilogue wrapping up character arcs.
That leaves far too little time for the ultimate, highest-stakes confrontation with the Mind Flayer itself. It requires either massive compression or some heavy expositional shortcuts.
While the kids are dealing with this existential, multi-dimensional threat, the sources remind us that the American government is desperately trying to catch up in the military's supernatural arms race.
Right. Dr. K's desperate outburst provided a major bombshell that recontextualizes the last few seasons. It reveals the dark truth that the entire conflict has been fueled by political and military motivations.
Yes, Dr. K confirms that everything that has happened, the opening of the gates, the continued pursuit of the dimensional threat, is because America wanted to weaponize Demogorgons against Russia.
This reframes the entire Starcourt Mall secret base and the Kamchatka prison storylines. It was all a desperate Cold War battle for interdimensional dominance.
It was, using horrific means to gain an advantage. This puts the U.S. government squarely in the role of a desperate, morally bankrupt antagonist.
And this Cold War motivation leads to a terrifying, newly revealed iteration of the MK Ultra program.
We should probably explain that context.
Yeah.
MK Ultra was the CIA's real-life, often illegal mind control program. This new iteration goes far beyond simple drug experimentation.
It really does. Dr. K, operating outside of official oversight, is explicitly trying to recreate powered beings.
The sources detail the horrifying plan. She was taking blood samples from Key, from Patient 9, who escaped the Chicago base, and infusing that blood, which is genetically derived from Henry Creel Patient 1, into pregnant women.
That is utterly chilling. It means the U.S. military is trying to breed a generation of super assassins for the Cold War to ensure that they have a supernatural edge over the Russians.
They are literally attempting to weaponize the biology of Henry Creel in utero. It is a dark, new low for the U.S. government's involvement and raises massive ethical questions about their desperation.
It creates a new, terrifying ticking clock separate from Vecna. Even if Vecna is defeated, the U.S. government is continuing the arms race, guaranteeing that the supernatural threats will continue long after the primary villain is vanquished.
A whole new can of worms.
Okay, let's turn our attention to the one returning character who has generated massive suspicion among the deep dive community, Kali, or 008. The question surrounding her is immense. Is she a genuine traitor or ally?
Suspicion of Kali's motives is exceptionally high. Her reintroduction, while giving Eleven some necessary philosophical grounding, generated massive debate about her ultimate loyalty.
She encourages Eleven to adopt a mentality of survival sourced from pain and suggests Eleven needs to be ready to sacrifice herself or die to bring peace.
Her philosophy is deeply problematic in the context of the story. Her emphasis on leveraging anger and darkness immediately connects her thematic arc to Henry Creel, who draws his power from similar dark memories and past trauma.
This similarity makes her advice sound less like mentorship and more like manipulation.
And the audience has glaring questions about her backstory and loyalty that have not been adequately filled in by the narrative. Critics question how Kali knew so much about Henry's past if she escaped the lab so early, before Henry's dramatic transformation.
And crucially, why did she disappear during the Hawkins lab massacre in the first place? She simply vanished when she could have intervened or been killed.
This fuels the theory of betrayal. Fan theories suggest Kali is a spy or has been infected or is controlled by the Mind Flayer.
Using her connection to trauma to trick Eleven into self-sacrifice.
Right, dying alone in the abyss, thereby opening a permanent pathway for the Mind Flayer to enter our world. Hopper is explicitly shown in the sources to not trust her, noticing her prolonged eye contact and sinister attitude during their brief interactions.
And her identity itself fuels this speculation. Her name is noted to reference the Hindu goddess of time, creation, and destruction.
Which suggests her final role will be immense and possibly fatal, requiring an ultimate devastating choice. She might force Eleven to choose a path that ends in Eleven's own death, believing it's the only way to truly achieve the destruction of the Upside Down and the Abyss.
And all these high stakes, the Mind Flayer's supremacy and Kali's potential betrayal, lead us back to the persistent narrative problem that the show refuses to solve.
The problem of the death dilemma. Plot armor versus stakes.
We've thoroughly covered the critiques on fake tension, exemplified by Karen Wheeler's miraculous recovery. The audience universally wants stakes. They believe the show needs to execute sacrificial deaths for a truly satisfying conclusion.
And more practically, to trim the heavily bloated cast that has grown unwieldy over several seasons. If the show refuses to kill off a core character, the existential threat ultimately feels hollow.
It's a necessary cleansing process for a story this far into its run. If the show is afraid to lose main players, then the entire multi-season campaign against Vecna rings false. So, who are the main candidates for sacrifice, according to the sources?
Well, the candidates are often named based on who has completed a satisfying character arc or who needs to be removed for maximum earned emotional impact. Hopper is frequently mentioned, potentially sacrificing himself to save Eleven, completing his fatherhood arc.
And Steve is a major candidate, as his death would finally complete his redemption arc from the arrogant jock to the caring, sacrificial babysitter figure.
And then there's the wild card, Kali.
Right.
Kali is also heavily expected to be a sacrificial death, potentially serving as the non-main character casualty who provides a major emotional weight to Eleven without actually losing a central marketable protagonist.
There is also the outside possibility of Mike dying, which some sources speculate would neatly resolve the Eleven-Will-Mike relationship triangle, forcing Will and Eleven to rely solely on each other.
The overarching sentiment is critical. If the show ends with everyone surviving, having endured all of these unbelievable near-fatal incidents, the melting room, the explosions, the Demogorgon attacks, it will feel less like an epic conclusion and more like a safety-first finale.
Dictated by the need for a fully intact, marketable cast for potential future spin-offs, the fear of a predictable, non-consequential ending is massive.
The sources are split between those who argue the show is simply adhering to its 80s movie roots, where the kids always win, and those who feel that after almost a decade of investment, the show needs to evolve past fake-outs and impose genuine earned consequences on the core group.
We've mapped the chaos, defining the Upside Down as a cylindrical wormhole leading to the abyss. Examine the highly debated character decisions, from fighting in a monster lair to ill-timed confessions, and synthesize the crucial theories that place the Mind Flayer at the top of the villain hierarchy, with Kali's loyalty hanging precariously in the balance.
And the sources reveal a profound disconnect at the heart of the show's writing. Immense satisfaction with the moments of deep character connection and catharsis, but total frustration with the pacing, the massive unexplained plot holes, and the perceived dumbing down of dialogue used to convey complex science.
But I keep coming back to one detail, one physical structure that seems to embody all the structural writing problems in a massive, fleshy metaphor.
The meat wall. It encapsulates the problem of retroactive continuity.
Exactly. The most shocking revelation in the sources isn't about the exotic matter, the super soldiers, or the possibility of Kali's betrayal. It's the universal question asked by the audience. After spending a reported $500 million and almost a decade on this story, why did nobody, Hopper, Joyce, or any of the kids on their many crawls notice the giant, fleshy meat wall sitting right next to the front door of the military portal until this season?
It's the ultimate symptom of a story that's being continuously retrofitted for plot necessity, forcing viewers to suspend disbelief beyond the fantastical monster attacks and into the realm of basic visual acuity. The meat wall, the extreme plot armor of Karen Wheeler, and the cutting of the door when a card reader was present are all symptoms of the same core writing issue.
So if the writers can explain that single detail, the massive previously missed wall, in a way that genuinely respects the time and intelligence invested by these characters and the viewers, perhaps the finale won't be as rushed and inconsistent as everyone fears.
But if that detail remains unresolved, it summarizes the season's fundamental problem. Sometimes the lore is just invented to serve the scene, regardless of the established history.
And this leaves us with a final provocative thought that builds on the lore we just discussed.
If Eleven and the crew are successful in closing the cylindrical wormhole connecting to the abyss, and if, as the theories suggest, the powers of Eleven, Will, and Kali are ultimately derived from the Mind Flayer particles introduced into Henry Creel Patient 1, what happens to all their powers when the connection to the source of evil is permanently severed?
Will the heroes win the battle only to become normal, powerless kids again, stripped of the very abilities they needed to survive the rest of their lives? That's the tension, the ultimate potential sacrifice of their extraordinary nature that we must carry into the final confrontation.
The world is quite literally collapsing. The fabric of reality is tearing, and yet our heroes stop to settle 4 years of accumulated romantic tension and deep psychological trauma. Welcome to the debate.
And today we are really digging into that central tension from the final episodes of Stranger Things Season 5, Volume 2. Why, when the world is ending, are these characters stopping to work through all this emotional baggage?
Exactly. The question before us is this: Does the dramatic emphasis on these lengthy personal confrontations, Will's confession, the whole Nancy and Jonathan love triangle, all of it, does that serve as a necessary earned thematic payoff?
Or does it fundamentally shatter the pacing and the believability of a world-ending crisis? I'm going to argue that these protracted dialogues, these personal issues, they aggressively compromise the urgency of the event, and they introduce some really severe logical flaws that break the audience's suspension of disbelief.
And I'll be arguing that these character moments are not distractions at all. They are, in fact, the crucial earned climaxes necessary for character completion. They're the ultimate thematic shield against Vecna.
Okay.
So my perspective is really rooted in the thematic core of the entire series. The focus on character emotion isn't a tangent. It's the entire philosophical point. I mean, if this story, after nearly a decade, is fundamentally about the power of friendship and love and humanity conquering this, cosmic, overwhelming evil, then these emotional resolutions are, they're mandatory payoffs. We have to remember that Vecna, or Henry Creel, he isn't just a monster. He is a psychological predator. His entire power structure relies on finding and exploiting the deepest traumas, the secrets, the unaddressed guilt of his victims.
That's a powerful framing, I'll give you that. But I think it's trying to excuse some pretty poor structural choices by elevating the emotional stakes way above the physical ones.
Okay, well, consider Will Byers. His emotional struggle culminating in his confession about his true identity and his feelings. That wasn't just about personal liberation. It was structurally vital. He needed to purge that specific crushing fear of judgment precisely because Vecna seeks to use those exact psychological weaknesses against him just moments before the final mission. He had to be honest to render Vecna's primary tactical advantage, ineffective. This catharsis is a survival mechanism.
I see the utility in the idea of emotional cleansing. I do. But I'm still stuck on the timing and the execution. You just can't tell the audience that the clock is counting down to 0, the world is ending, and then have our key strategists stop for what feels like a 20-minute group therapy session. The timing introduces severe flaws in narrative logic and pacing. And I can tell you that for many viewers, these crucial episodes felt slow, even like filler, precisely because the dramatic urgency was constantly being sacrificed for these long discussions.
Let's talk about a specific instance you often bring up, the confrontation between Dustin and Steve. That deep exchange, fueled by Dustin's long-term grief and anxiety over Eddie's death, that was a necessary catharsis. That argument, even the physical scuffle in Hawkins' lab, it had to happen to purge the guilt and the pain. They needed to achieve that reconciliation, to rely fully on their established brotherhood before facing the absolute terror of the Upside Down.
But the physical confrontation happened while they were supposedly in a high-stakes, volatile environment, either in Hawkins' lab or the woods right nearby, preparing for battle. That level of screaming and physical fighting just contradicts the basic requirement for quiet, strategic movement and survival, especially given what we know about Demogorgons and Demodogs. It forces me to question the world's rules. If the environment is so deadly, why are the writing choices allowing characters to behave with such tactical carelessness? It reads as military incompetence, not, necessary character development.
I think that minimizes the psychological realism inherent in the show. If Dustin had entered that final fight carrying the crippling weight of guilt over Eddie, especially after Steve so cruelly minimized Eddie's sacrifice, he would have been psychologically vulnerable. That instability would make him an immediate target for Vecna. The narrative has to slow down and allow these characters to achieve the emotional strength required to confront a foe whose entire existence relies on psychological weakness. The emotional arc is the practical preparation. Without that catharsis, they would be structurally incapable of winning.
I appreciate that defense, but I'm just not convinced. If this emotional processing is so strategic, why didn't Will's confession happen in a safe space, like at the base camp, days before the mission, instead of minutes before execution? This pattern consistently breaks the suspension of disbelief by minimizing the physical threat for the sake of this forced emotional symmetry. And let's look at the logical flaws this stuff introduces. The incident with Nancy and Jonathan is maybe the most egregious example. They are in a chamber right next to a massive rift, where the exotic matter, that strange corrosive liquid that pours out of the dimensional tears, is flooding the room. This stuff can consume vehicles, it uproots trees, and yet after their drawn-out conversation, where they hash out the unproposal symbolized by the ring and the Love Supreme cassette, the liquid suddenly solidifies. It just cleans up instantly.
But that unproposal scene was profound and necessary. It established that their supreme love transcends the temporary divide caused by their diverging life paths.
Profound? Maybe, but physically absurd. The implication is that their honest reconciliation magically defies physical law and chemical volatility. It suggests the emotional force of their honesty is stronger than the corrosive nature of dimension-tearing material. It completely eliminates any real sense of danger for our core protagonist, which leads directly to the widespread complaint of plot armor.
This focus on technical realism, while valued, I think it misses the foundational genre of the show. This is an 80s-inspired adventure model, think The Goonies or E.T., where the central young protagonists are by convention protected. The writers have been consistent in raising the stakes by eliminating beloved side characters, like Eddie or Bob, to maintain tension. But the core ensemble is traditionally shielded. You are correct that the plot armor is strong, but it is earned plot armor, consistent with the tone and narrative promise of the series. The true peril lies in the characters' psychological endurance, not their physical mortality.
But the issue extends beyond the core kids. Look at Mrs. Wheeler. She was severely injured, presumably resting, and yet somehow she magically recovers, finds an oxygen tank, and navigates the chaotic remnants of Hawkins' lab to find the exact room where Lucas and Robin are fighting demo dogs, and then she blows them up with impossible timing. Where is the integrity in that resolution? If Lucas can just kick away a charging Gorgon like it was nothing a few moments earlier, why should the audience invest in the tension? The writing manipulates the stakes. Death is teased, but never delivered for the essential cast, making the physical threats feel, non-existent.
The tension is rooted not in the body count, but in whether they can face their fears and grow. The emotional stakes, like Will facing the fear of judgment, or Dustin processing survivor's guilt, are, I'd argue, higher and more relevant to the show's decade-long investment. And furthermore, we have to acknowledge that complex plot exposition was being delivered precisely during these high-stakes moments, which necessitated some slowdown. We were receiving crucial scientific and military lore that was years in the making.
And that brings us to the third major structural issue, the difficulty of following that crucial lore because it was crammed in alongside all the emotional arguments. Much of the necessary exposition, specifically the nature of the Upside Down being a cylindrical wormhole connected to Dimension X, now called the Abyss, or the Cold War military connection, it's all explained via rushed, jargon-heavy dialogue that feels entirely forced. The narrative suffered from explanation, not exploration.
I think we need to briefly contextualize that lore for the listener. What you are referring to is the dense scientific exposition synthesized largely by Dustin from Dr. Berner's research notes, and it was vital to tie together years of fragmented plot threads. Without Dustin piecing this together, we wouldn't understand the mechanism of the world merger, or the critical information about America trying to weaponize the Demogorgons, which completely reframes years of the show's history.
Precisely. It was essential, but it was presented so awkwardly. Dustin, a high schooler, suddenly understands complex theories about wormholes and black holes from random papers, and is then tasked with explaining it all to the audience mid-crisis. It's exposition by monologue, and it's not just the physics. We received incredibly complex character lore, like Dr. K's shocking plan to infuse Collie's blood into pregnant women to restart the process that created Henry Creel, all revealed through dialogue that should have had space to breathe.
But that dialogue had to happen. That exposition, though lengthy, is necessary to avoid massive plot holes in the final battle. Understanding the mechanism of the world merger, that Henry Creel's mission is to merge the dimensions by creating a series of rifts, is critical for the heroes to develop a counter strategy. The information about Collie's backstory and the nature of the numbers powers is essential, and it came when we needed it most.
I really disagree about the timing. The sequencing is completely awkward. For instance, the crucial revelation of Vecna's corruption, that the Mind Flayer particles entered Henry from the briefcase in the cave, making Henry a pawn rather than the true mastermind, that's revealed in a memory while Max is having a long, cheesy talk with Holly. The lore, which is critical to understanding the ultimate big bad. Is it Vecna or the Mind Flayer? It's buried under the weight of character drama. The dramatic density is just too high. You stuff major character arcs, Will's confession, Collie's return, Holly's expanded role, into the final moments, ensuring that no single thread, especially the complex scientific framework, can be explored with appropriate depth.
Contend the emotional context lends necessary weight to the lore. Take the scene you just cited between Max and Holly. While it seems slow, that conversation focused on Max helping Holly realize that the Captain Midnight telescope lens cover is itself an M-shaped clue aligning with Henry's traumatic memory cave. This was a moment of profound realization tied directly to their final strategy against Vecna. This lore can't exist in a vacuum. It has to be integrated into the human motivation for fighting. The characters need an emotional reason to absorb and utilize this information.
But that integration comes at the cost of clarity. The audience is struggling to process the implications of Dimension X and the wormhole theory, while simultaneously worrying about whether Nancy and Jonathan will ever get back together. The writers attempted to serve two masters, the action blockbuster and the character drama, and in doing so, they compromised the structural rigor of the plot. If the information about the military weaponizing Demogorgons was so essential to reframe the show's history, it should have been seeded earlier in a lower-stakes environment, allowing for visual exploration rather than a frantic monologue delivered by a teenager.
But the chaos of the moment is exactly why the dialogue is effective. In high-pressure situations, people rely on trusted experts, in this case, Dustin, to synthesize complexity rapidly. The very integration you criticize is what makes the science feel earned and necessary, rather than just tacked on as a mid-season info dump. The emotional stakes are what ground the science. The knowledge that Henry has a vulnerability, his fear of that initial cave, becomes exponentially more compelling when we see our core protagonists struggle with their own fears in real time.
The struggle feels contrived when the logical consequences are ignored. The show established rules for its own physics, the volatility of the rifts, the immediate danger of the upside down, and then it routinely broke those rules for the sake of a perfect character resolution. The resolution of the love triangle and Will's catharsis are important, but they're not worth sacrificing the foundational logic of the catastrophe.
Ultimately, the emotional depth provided in Volume 2 grants necessary closure and, crucially, provides the fundamental human motivation for the final conflict. These intimate moments ensure that the audience cares not just about if the world is saved, but why these specific individuals who have overcome years of intense trauma and personal secrecy deserve to survive and thrive. The personal climax provides the thematic justification for the external fight. They are not merely saving the world, they are saving themselves from the very weaknesses Vecna seeks to exploit.
And while those emotional arcs demand a conclusion, sacrificing logical consistency and critical pacing at the expense of impending catastrophe is a structural failure. The heavy reliance on dialogue to explain complex lore and settle long-running conflicts suggests a bloated narrative, desperately trying to fit too many resolutions and too many unanswered questions, like Collie's true trustworthiness and the precise hierarchy of the threats, into the immediate buildup to the finale. We have to acknowledge the trade-off. Emotional catharsis came at the steep cost of narrative rigor and realistic tension.
The show is gearing up for a monumental conclusion, and every primary character needed to be in place, emotionally fortified, and strategically informed to face the final monumental threat. It's a testament to the show's decade-long investment that the audience cares so deeply about the internal state of these heroes even when the external threat is world-ending.
And we are left weighing whether the characters are heroes who earned their catharsis through logical struggle, or simply beneficiaries of a script that prioritized dialogue over the consistency of danger. The final episodes force the audience to determine the value of emotional integrity against the necessity of narrative rigor.
A tension that will undoubtedly define how we view the final act. Always a pleasure discussing this material.
The pleasure was mine.
If you enjoy this video, please like, share, subscribe, and hit the bell to the later update from my channel. Thank you for watching till the end, and see you in the next video.